Feather walked out of the Grisco building, pulling on her gloves as she made her way to the water. The boat floated, moored at the end of the dock, bobbing slightly in the ocean which sprawled behind the ship. She fussed with her uniform as she walked, and as she boarded, she hadn't paid attention to who else was on her squad, and honestly didn't care at the moment, as she just wanted to get the money and get out. With a sigh, she sat in one of the seats closer to the bow, looking towards the sky. Not too long after, another Inkling, Kraken, appeared out of the building onto the near-abandoned deck. He breathed in nervously as he made his way towards the boat. He kept tugging at his gloves and hat, reassuring that they were there. It had been a long time since he'd last worn this uniform. He'd quit working at Grisco in favor of ranked battles, but recent financial situations had him coming back after almost 2 years. He paused for a moment at the bottom of the boarding ramp. He considered turning back as he rubbed his hands nervously down the sides of his pants. As he did, he felt his wallet in one of his pockets and how sadly empty it felt even from inside his clothes. Forcing his legs to move, he finally boarded, looking around to see who he might be working with. The deck was devoid of anyone except for a scarlet-haired Inkling sitting alone. She looked confident. Maybe talking to her would rid him of his own nerves. Acting as calm as he could, he sauntered up to her and tried to strike up a conversation.
So,
he started.
What brings you along for this job?
Internally, Feather rolled her eyes. She sat here to avoid unnecessary chats. She was already frustrated doing this today specifically, but she had nothing better to be doing anyway. Taking a quick once-over of the boy stood in front of her, she sneered slightly and looked around him, only to realize that they were alone. There was no escaping this, clearly, so against her better judgment, she spoke.
Money. Likely the same as you,
she said without looking at him, her tone short.
What else does anyone come here for?
She paused for a moment before continuing.
Name's Feather. Try not to get too much in the way, kid.
She stressed the last word, irritation dripping from her voice. Kraken was taken aback for a moment, surprised at Feather's aggressive demeanor, before his face dropped into a more offended scowl.
Hey, I doubt you're that much older than me. Besides, a bunch of squids used to come here for the rush of it. Hell, that's why I signed up. A long time ago, that is. It was a long time ago.
He retorted as he took the seat next to her. A moment of awkward silence passed, and he started nervously picking at his gloves again.
So, do you like any of the weapons in the rotation? I've heard Mr. Grizz is lending out his personal charger, but I've never had the chance to use it before.
Feather gave another very audible sigh before answering.
Yes, I do like some of the weapons. Flingza and Splattershot Pro mostly. Grisco Charger is pretty okay. I'm not the best with chargers, and that old thing is a bit too ink hungry for me. Is he really gonna keep bothering me?
She thought to herself. She looked out to sea for a moment, then a wave of anger flowed over her, and she whipped around.
Why the hell are you sitting next to me? Go talk to the others or something. Hell, here they come now!
She snarled viciously, her silver eyes flashing as she jabbed a thumb angrily towards an Inkling and Octoling boarding the ship. Kraken's face was a mixture of hurt and anger. Why couldn't he get on this bitch's good side?
Hey! What'd I ever do to you, lady?
He snapped back.
Fine! If it means that much to you, I'll just leave you alone.
He remained in his seat, but turned to face away from her. Childish as it may have been, it felt good to turn his back on her and leave her to her angry little bubble. Besides, if her butt got fucked by the Salmonids, then she could go to someone else to save her. Across the deck, the two newcomers were having a half-assed conversation, clearly trying not to look like they had overheard the altercation, but being betrayed by their occasional glances over.
What are you looking at?
Feather snapped to the other two when she caught them looking at her. As she turned away, something bothered her about the Octoling, though she couldn't place why. She shook her head, no point in thinking about it now. The rest of the boat ride went in near silence, and Feather controlled her anger a bit. She just wanted to concentrate on her shift. Eventually, they made it to Mariner's Bay, and she was the first to stand. The resource manager, Ren, came out to the deck, rolling out the cart that held all the weapons of the day. She approached the table, and Ren looked down at a clipboard in his hand, squinting slightly before looking up and nodding his head towards the Flingser roller. As she grabbed the weapon and specials, she nodded to Ren and gave a slight smile, which he returned. Hurrying off to the launch bay, she strapped the specials under the band on her helmet, adjusted her jacket one last time, and waited for the rest to catch up to her so they could all start their shift. She was slightly impatient, hating the company protocol of all workers going together. After a while, she muttered to herself, just enough that anyone around her could hear.
This is gonna be a disaster.
Kraken came up next to get his assigned weapon from Ren. It took the Octoling a moment, but he eventually found Kraken's assigned weapon on the sheet and pointed him towards the table.
You're taking, the E-liter and the inkjet,
He said.
Great.
He deadpanned. As he took what he was assigned, he sucked his teeth.
We didn't have shitty, slow-ass resource managers in my day.
He thought to himself, immediately scolding himself for sounding like such an old man after the thought. By now, Kraken and the rest of the crew had caught up with Feather and were waiting for the go-ahead to super jump to the bay. In the meantime, he aimed his E-liter at the redhead's ass and pretended to fire it, earning a laugh from the two others. He gave a cocky smirk, enjoying the approval for the moment before the horn rang out and they all jumped over. It didn't take long after they landed for the sky to turn dark.
Shit,
he thought, and he realized everyone else was thinking the same thing. Fog quickly settled over the bay, obstructing everyone's view. The horn blared out again somewhere in the distance, and a large silhouette slowly rose by the shore. Feather instantly flung her roller, jumping into action and racing down to the other end of the island. Knowing that the E-liter would have the easiest time dealing with the hulking beast coming through the fog, she swam closer to the steelhead.
Hey, E-liter! Over here!
She yelled, pressing this way on her radio to alert him to her position, praying he knew what he was doing. Alongside the Octoling with the Splattershot Pro, she concentrated on the lesser salmonids before coming face to face with a massive Moz snapping its jaws directly in front of her face. With a yell of surprise, she scrambled back towards the group, dropping a splat bomb below her as the Moz tried again to strike. She snatched up a golden egg after the explosion obliterated the salmonid and sped away, calling everyone to tell them there were golden eggs when the Moz had died.
I hate this thing! It's too damn slow!
Kraken practically shouted as a group of chum were approaching him. He was about to shoot the fish when he heard Feather yell to him. He clenched his teeth as he debated what to do. The damn thing didn't charge fast enough to take out both the chums and the steelhead. He saw a break in the ranks of the salmonids around him. Now was his chance. With the E-liter finally charged, he quickly snapped it towards the steelhead's bomb and shot it, making the beast explode into 3 golden eggs. He dropped the splat bomb by his feet, hoping that it would kill some of the chum gathered around him as he slipped between 2 of the fish as they swung their pans and shouted angrily. Rather than going for the eggs the steelhead dropped, he joined Feather in the Splattershot Pro in grabbing the eggs from the maw. He gave a weird look to the Pro user as he picked up his egg. He never would understand that weird hair trend, and he was surprised that such a fad had managed to remain popular amongst so many Inklings for so many years. Kraken was the last one to deliver his egg. Unlike his co-workers, who rushed back towards the shore, he hung back towards the grates and charged. It was then that he saw a distinctive glow in the distance.
Goldie, they don't ever come out this early,
he thought. He wasn't upset about it though, since Goldies posed almost no threat and could drop 10 eggs. That would put them over their quota. He shot a steel eel that was trying to creep its way up to the basket. As he ran to pick up the eggs, he yelled,
"Everyone, Goldie on the way!"
into his walkie, catching Feather's attention. Feather's ears pricked at the sniper's yell. She whipped around and shot back to the basket, dropping the last egg from the steelhead. As she turned, she could clearly see the faint gold through the fog and moved towards it, only to be met by a horde of salmonids. She tried to back out, but was stopped by a scrapper ramming her to the ground. Despite knowing that she would be safe, she could never help the fear that she felt for a moment as the vehicle bore down on her, chasing her as she got to her feet. Barely missing the swinging pan of a quahog, she used one of her splashdowns, taking out the group surrounding her and stopping the scrapper. As the girl with the tri-slosher went to take it out, Feather concentrated on killing the Goldie, jumping to slam her roller down on it. She missed just barely as it moved out of the way, but as she started her next swing, the Goldie exploded in her face. Feather looked up to see Kraken preparing another charge. He had hit the Goldie with a full charge before Feather could, and without missing a beat, she grabbed an egg and swam off. Chucking a bomb at a group of salmonids, he squinted into the distance. It was hard to see in the fog, but it looked as if 2 maws were on their way up. Kraken frowned. If he missed one of these, then someone would have to come bail him out. Thankfully, he made both of his bomb shots. He called out to his teammates as he grabbed an egg and hurried back to the basket. The wave was only halfway through, but they had already met their quota. However, by now, both the Tri-Slosher and the Pro were down. Back at the basket, Feather grumbled in anger as she deposited one of the measly 3 eggs they had gotten from the Goldie, but at least she was assured in the fact that any more eggs were extra for their quota of the wave. On her way back, after flattening a pot of small fries, she suddenly noticed that there seemed to be only one other person standing on the platform with her, the guy with the E-leader. At that moment, she registered the sound of her walkie going off with help alerts. Their other 2 co-workers were on complete opposite sides of the ruined ship. Feather turned her head towards Kraken.
Hey, kid, down on your left by the docks. Revive the slosher, I'll get this guy over here. And watch out! I'm sure there's a flyfish around here somewhere, she said as she ducked away from the flyfish's missiles. She dove off the right side of the bow, needing to get closer to be able to see where the Splattershot Pro was. Unfortunately, she landed next to 2 Quahog, and they immediately swung around, raising their pans to attack as they loomed above her. With a yelp, she tried to backpedal and dropped a bomb, flicking her roller that went off and cleared her path. Swimming up to the side of the steel eel that stood between Feather and their co-worker, she made a vertical flick over the wall of ink, reviving the Splattershot Pro, but catching the eel's attention. With a loud groan of creaking metal, the head of the eel turned to snap its massive jaws at her. Feather sidestepped, and as the Octoling swam away with a golden egg, she swam behind the contraption and took out the driver, destroying the machine and earning the egg. On the opposite end of the island, Kraken took aim to revive the Tri-Slosher. Thankfully, she was just barely inside his range. He revived her, and she quickly started swimming through the trail the E-leader left. With another shot, he managed to take out a few of the chum behind her before turning his attention to more pressing matters. Coming right up to the basket was another Goldie. With the rest of his crew preoccupied, he decided he could handle it on his own. He tossed a bomb to take out the basket of another flyfish and started charging up a shot. 1 full charge and 2 pokes later, the Goldie was dead. Unlike the last one, which had been a total disappointment, this one dropped the full 10 eggs. Kraken gave a little squeal of happiness before picking up one of the eggs. Perfect 10s were very rare.
Hey, everyone! 10 egger by the basket!
He said through his walkie-talkie. There wasn't much time left in the wave, so Kraken quickly went to work delivering as many of the eggs as he could. However, he had to stop and shoot every time to keep the salmonids away, and the E-leader was already a heavyweight weapon. Pressing this way on his walkie, he swam off, hoping that someone could help him with the remaining egg.
Perfect 10. Hell yeah!
Feather said to herself as she made her way to the basket.
Hey, you 2! Keep those salmonids busy as me and E-leader get these last eggs in the basket,
she barked to the Tri-Slosher and Splattershot Pro. Turning, she started taking eggs, picking them up and throwing them in the basket alongside the E-leader with a perfectly practiced ease from years of work. As the time finally hit 0, Feather had managed to get her last egg into the basket and watched as the salmonids disappeared back into the water as they came. She scraped the green salmonid slime off her clothes in disgust.
Ugh, salmonids. Why do they exist?
Feather said aloud to herself. She looked up at her disgruntled crew. Though the other 2 seemed to be a bit worse for wear, the E-leader was looking quite proud of himself.
Kid may not be that bad after all,
she thought to herself, though that didn't stop her from giving him a sidelong glare. Suddenly, everyone's walkies went off.
Alright, crew. Back to the boat to rest for a bit, recalibrate, and switch up weapons.
Kraken, proud of meeting their quota, celebrated the victory by squid flopping. He was quite surprised when no one else took part in it, but perhaps that tradition had been lost over the past couple years. Feather rolled her eyes, annoyed at the yellow-haired Inkling's celebration, though she had to resist the urge to join.
I just want to be done with this,
she thought aggressively.
Quit slacking!
You heard Ran. We need to get back to the boat. She growled, looking at Kraken pointedly before super jumping away.
Bossy bitch, Kraken said snidely under his breath as he followed suit with the rest of the crew.
As soon as they hit the deck, everyone moved to put their weapons back on the table, and Ren called out the reassignments. Kraken groaned in frustration as he was told he would be getting Feather's weapon, the Flingza roller. As he picked up his weapon, he noticed Feather walking away and leaning against the railing of the boat. He looked back at their other two crew members, and for a moment he considered talking to one of them, but his mind kept wandering back to that mysterious and aloof England. Why she specifically intrigued him so much, despite her standoffishness, he didn't know, but he was going to get her to talk to him by the time this shift was over. Steeling himself for whatever interaction may come, he approached Feather.
Hey, my name is Kraken. That's what people call me, anyway. You, did really good out there,
He said timidly. All his confidence had disappeared in that moment as Feather's piercing silver eyes locked onto him. All of a sudden, he was more than aware of the weapon he had over his shoulder. He looked like a badass during the last wave, but now he was stuck with his worst weapon, and by the slight smirk that appeared on her face, he knew that Feather knew it too. Swallowing his nerves, he stuck out his hand for a handshake, hoping she would be friendlier this time. Feather stared blankly at Kraken for an uncomfortably long moment before she spoke.
You did alright too, kid,
she said flatly, looking back over the water.
You got good aim. Handled yourself better than most with this garbage thing.
Hefting the charger on her shoulder for emphasis. Kraken watched as Feather raised a small silver flask to her lips, taking a long swig before screwing the top back on and stowing it back under the orange rubber overalls. As she did so, her eyes slid back over to him again, glaring at him out of the corner of her eye as a menacing smirk crossed her lips.
Of course, I hope that skill comes out with these other weapons. Be a shame if we fail our quota because...
She tilted her head down a bit, breaking eye contact.
Never mind. It isn't important. Best get ready to go.
Yeah, me too,
Kraken said to no one in particular. He was having a small internal panic attack now. Not just because of Feather's disapproval, but now for the whole team's success. Sure, in the end there wouldn't really be any big consequence if they messed up, but it would mean a significantly smaller payout between the four of them, and he was broke and in desperate need of the cash. Kraken turned away, lost in thoughts about the past. A couple years ago, Grisco let them choose which of the weapons they wanted. He'd completely forgotten that they changed their procedure when he signed up again. He shook his head and looked back at Feather. His heart lifted a little as he noticed her adjusting the E-liter again with an uncomfortable look on her face. She was just as out of her element as he was. His temporary confidence was shattered almost immediately, however, as he realized that the wave was squarely on the shoulders of their other two co-workers.
That's never good,
he thought to himself.